So Anna is a current mid student here at the iSchool, and she's going to discuss key findings from her project, The Building Blocks of Gender Equality, Health, Education, and Employment, which was a winner of Google Cloud's Visualize 2030 contest. And Anna, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, thank you, Caitlin. And hello, everyone. I'm really happy that you're here today. I'm Anna Jacobson, and to give a bit of context, this is my background. I started my professional life as a structural engineer, and I quickly transitioned into construction management, which is what I've been doing for the last 18 years. I've worked on large institutional projects like museums, libraries, and university buildings all around Los Angeles. A few years ago, my focus shifted from on-site project management to what we call in my industry pre-construction, which is sort of an umbrella term for all kinds of project planning activities that take place before construction can begin. This led to my growing interest in predictive analytics, and 1 year ago I started the MIDS program at UC Berkeley to learn to be a data scientist, and I expect to graduate next year. So I'm here today to talk about a specific data project that I did last fall called Visualize 2030. The 2030 Agenda is an initiative that was launched by a United Nations Summit in 2015. Its intent is to define a framework of what they call Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, to make the world a better place by 2030. The goals cover a wide range of societal and environmental improvements intended to end poverty, help society, and preserve the environment. Last year, Google Cloud, in collaboration with the World Bank, the UN, and the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, hosted a competition called Visualize 2030. They called it a data storytelling contest, and the goal was to create a data-driven narrative that gave insight into how two or more of the SDGs influence each other. The contest provided two tools that we were required to use: public data sets provided by the UN Statistics Division and the World Bank, and that was for the content of the story, and a Google product called Data Studio as the platform for the story. There were no other requirements or even really guidelines with regard to length or format, organization, or content. It was left pretty wide open. From the start, I was interested in SDG number 5, which is gender equality. The more research I did, the more intrigued I became with the idea that gender equality can't exist in a vacuum. It must be embodied in our core social structures in order to have impact. So I decided to explore other development goals that also rely on these same social structures to see if there was a relationship. In particular, I thought that gains in health, education, and employment might have the potential to dramatically improve gender equality. And gains in gender equality would result in improvement in these areas. From these ideas came my project, which I called the Building Blocks of Gender Equality. And what I found is that there is pretty strong evidence that progress in these areas does coexist. I had initially planned to do a walkthrough of my project today, but as I prepared, I realized that that probably wasn't the best use of our time. So I'll provide a link for anybody who's interested in taking a look. And in fact, I'll put that in chat right now. But for today, I wanted to just jump right into some key lessons that I learned in the process of doing this project. So lesson number 1 was how to wrangle big data. I chose to use the UN Sustainable Development Indicators data set, which includes data for 100 SDIs, which are measurable data that are used as sort of barometers for measuring progress toward the Sustainable Developing Goals. It included more than 1 million records from over 300 countries and regions, and in most cases, the data was multidimensional using complex data structures. So this was the biggest and most complicated data set that I had ever worked with up to this point. And in order to explore it, I used a tool that comes included in Google Data Studio, which is called Explorer. It's an early stage, what they call labs feature, which means that it's kind of in beta, but I found it to be very useful for facilitating data exploration. It allows for on-the-fly manipulation and visualization of the data. And I treated it as kind of a sketchbook as I was developing my ideas. It allows you to easily try things out without being sort of intimidated by the final format of the report. And the cool thing is that once you're ready, you can export the results of the explorations into a Data Studio report, so you don't have to recreate anything or duplicate any effort. The second lesson I learned was how to create interactive data visualization. As many of you probably know, D3 is the state of the art for interactive data visualizations. It's used by the New York Times, by The Pudding, many others. It's basically the coolest thing out there. However, by most accounts, D3 has a very steep learning curve. Even those who have a strong computer science background say that it's a challenging skill to acquire. By contrast, Google Data Studio, which was originally intended for people in marketing, is very accessible. It's quick to learn, quick to use, it requires no coding and no special hardware. And it allowed me to produce some pretty cool interactive data visualizations in a very short amount of time. I think the really important takeaway from these two lessons is not like, hey, look at these cool new tools. Rather, it's about the democratization of data literacy. As someone who's investing a lot of resources into becoming a professional data scientist, I've learned Python and R, I'm planning to learn D3, and I plan to use these tools in my career. As much fun as it was to learn how to use Data Studio, I don't see it really changing how I will do data science in the future. However, I think that Data Studio and other tools like it may change how the world does data science in the future. As author Alan Downey recently said in an interview, if you look at what people really need to know and what they're likely to use, in the future, practically everybody is going to be a consumer of data science, and I think more and more people are going to be producers of data science. When my 4-year-old son and his friends are running the world, I think that basic data manipulation and interpretation will be a necessary life skill, like writing or arithmetic. My guess is that easy, accessible kinds of tools, like Data Studio, will make that transformation possible. So jumping to lesson number 3, this is shifting gears a little bit. It's a little more conceptual. Feminist data science is not a term that I've heard used much, or really at all. However, as someone studying data science in the midst of the Me Too movement, surrounded by debates in the tech industry ranging from toxic masculinity in Silicon Valley to algorithmic fairness, it's something I've thought a lot about. I've been asking myself these questions. How can we use data science to quantify and communicate inequality? How can we use data science to replicate successes in diversity and inclusion? How can we promote social good through our practice of data science? I don't know the answers to these questions yet, but I have learned from a long career in a very male-dominated industry that the playing field often truly appears to be level to those who are standing on the high side of it. It's kind of an optical illusion. I think to these people, numbers that prove inequality are more persuasive than being told of feelings of inequality. And this applies not only to gender issues, but to a whole range of socioeconomic issues. As data scientists, we are uniquely qualified to engage in this kind of persuasion if we choose. I didn't enter this field with any particular ambitions about using my new skills to help others, but now I'm beginning to see how possible and how powerful it could be. The fourth lesson I wanted to talk about is that to observe is to be changed. Most of you have probably heard of the observer effect, which is the scientific principle that the act of observing will influence the phenomenon under observation. But I think there's another observer effect that's particularly relevant for data scientists, and that is that the act of observing will change the observer. I learned an enormous amount about the world through working on this analysis. I already had a strong sense that being a woman in, say, Scandinavia is a lot easier than being a woman in Africa. But there's so much more to that story. I learned heartbreaking things about countries like Eswatini and Lesotho, tiny sub-Saharan African nations where women routinely face unimaginable hardship and danger. I learned that in countries like Yemen, less than 5% of girls are in school. But I also learned about Cuba, where in spite of extremely high poverty, every single girl learns how to read. And I learned about Bolivia, where female representation in parliament has increased 460% since the year 2000 to over 50% in 2018. Perhaps the most extraordinary country I learned about is Rwanda, whose leaders came together after their horrific genocide in 1994 to face the hard fact that with so many of their young men dead, it was critical for their country's survival to empower their women. This resulted in a 30% quota for female representation in their parliament, and today over 60% of the Rwandan parliament is women, the largest proportion in the world. I travel, I read the news, I like to think that I know what's happening in the world, but there was so much I didn't know that I learned by doing this project. It's really a privilege, if you think about it, to have access to so much information about people and their lives. As data scientists, it's really important that we recognize that we have that privilege. The data is just numbers, but the insight that we can extract from it can make us more thoughtful, more compassionate, more ethical people. And I think we should welcome the opportunity that we have to change in that way. The last lesson I wanted to talk about today is this one: just try. I want to be really clear about this. I did not enter this contest thinking that there was any possibility that I could win. I had no prior experience with the data. I had no prior experience with the technology. I had no special knowledge about the global development domain. I had never done a project like this one, and I didn't think that my idea was really innovative enough. Worst of all, the contest began on July 24th, but I didn't learn about it until November 9th, and the submissions were due on November 16th. So I literally had 1 week to work on it. So the odds really did not seem to be in my favor, but I thought it would be interesting and a good learning experience, so I did it anyway. And just before Christmas, I learned that I was one of 5 winners. I got a very nice cash prize, and Google presented my project at the Davos World Economic Forum in January. But more important than that was the validation that I could do something good, something meaningful in this space. I know that this is supposed to be a tech talk, not a TED talk, and it's more than a bit of a cliche to finish up with an inspirational message. But I really feel that this message is so important, so fundamental to everything else. I couldn't leave it out. You have to just try. As a lifelong perfectionist, it has always been hard for me to risk being less than perfect. And as someone who's become quite established professionally, it's been very scary for me to contemplate starting over as a new data scientist. But when I decided to apply to graduate school just over a year ago, I made myself a promise that I would measure my own success by the quality of the effort that I put into the experience. If I hadn't won this competition, it would have been fine. I still would have walked away having learned the things that I'm telling you about today. The important thing is just to try. It's amazing what we can accomplish when we do. So here are all the ways you can reach me, and I hope you will. For now, we do have some time left for questions. So if you want to put them in the chat or the Q&A, I'd be happy to try to answer them. Thank you, Radhika. Okay. So tips for doing feminist data science. So I don't in any way want to frame myself as an expert in this space, but I do think feminism doesn't have to be a standalone concept. I think feminism can be part of a lot of the work that we do. So to give another example, when I took Python last spring, we were given an open assignment to do an exploratory data analysis. And without any thought towards feminism, I looked at a data set from the Museum of Modern Art that had to do with artists, the artists that have been shown there since they opened in 1929. Again, I didn't go into it looking for anything in particular. But once you started looking at the breakdowns by gender, it was frankly shocking how underrepresented women were in this data set. And so just being able to pull out that information and put numbers to it and share it in a way that other people could understand and see the disparity, I think is a really important step forward. Again, I think there's a lot of people out there who it's not necessarily that they're sexist, they just don't actually understand or see the inequalities that are around them, because that's kind of what privilege is, right? You're not affected by it, so you think it doesn't exist. So I think just being able to look for that information and share it with other people is a big first step. Any other questions? Oh, and Caitlin just put that project in the chat. Um, what am I working on now? Nothing related to feminism. I just finished working on another data visualization project that was also related to global development. But in that one, I wasn't looking specifically at gender issues. There, I was looking at countries that where the performance on a variety of indicators was disproportionate to their wealth in the world. And a lot of interesting findings there too. So related, but not in the feminist theme. So thoughts about tech and development. You know, oh, and what was the project's reception like at Davos? Okay, well, starting with that one, the quick answer is I don't know exactly. Google has said that they recorded the presentation and they're planning to put it up, but I haven't seen it yet myself. I will say I have been contacted by a number of people who saw the presentation at Davos, people who work for other nonprofits that are focused on global development, who've asked if for permission to use the slides in their own education efforts. And that's a great feeling to know that this information is going to get disseminated to others, particularly there seemed to be a lot of attention about the health issues that women face and the disparities in health. So if in any tiny way this can help improve outcomes for women globally, then that would be so rewarding for me. Okay, so going back to tech and development. So again, I'm not really, I would not say an expert in global development, but I do think that as much as tech can help get information to people, and whether that is information about about the things that I was looking at, like educational information, health information, economic opportunity. If tech can help get that information out in developing countries, then I do think that it can play a role in these development problems. But just like anywhere, I mean, including the United States, we have a lot of problems that are problems in our culture and our society. And I don't think that tech is going to be the answer to those problems. It may be a tool in finding solutions, but it's not going to solve them. I truly believe that these are human problems that have to be solved by humans. Any other questions? Okay, Caitlin, should I give it back to you?
Anna, since you mentioned it, I have a question. Could you elaborate more on your decision to make this career shift and sort of maybe what you envision your career looking like a couple years down the road after you graduate from the MIDS program?
Sure, as much as I can. I mean, I've had a conversation with Lori, who I think is here with us, where I said, and I believe this, that my ideal job probably doesn't exist yet. And I think I'm going to find that job by taking my ideas about what the potential for data science in my industry is to people, and if those people have a vision that aligns with mine, maybe they'll be interested in creating a job. Basically, as I said, I've been working in construction management for over 18 years. And what I've seen is that in my job, the biggest planning activity is figuring out what the cost and the schedule of any particular construction project is going to be. And it's very complicated because it involves, sort of unlimited numbers of variables that play into it. So there's a long history of sort of trying to quantify. You have X number of widgets on the job, and the widgets each cost, Y number of dollars, and so that works out to a cost. Over and over again, particularly with these big complicated jobs, that method has kind of failed. And there's a lot of literature out there about, especially mega projects, which are projects over $1 billion, where the budgets are just overshot by hundreds of percentage points. So it seems to me pretty obvious that the kind of predictive techniques and using data science to predict what project outcomes might be, it's a natural fit, and it's something that is really not being done at all in my industry. So that's what I want to focus on is how can we predict the future of these projects in a way that isn't based on just counting things and assigning values to them. I think there's a huge opportunity there, particularly as the projects are getting more complicated and the documents that we're using to quantify these things are getting less and less complete. So that's very exciting to me. There's also other things that are happening in the world of construction tech, where construction tech is starting to intersect with data science. There's something called generative design, which has to do with using AI to generate different design options rather than right now it's an army of architects, and it's a very inefficient process. So that's something else that I'm interested in. But I would say right now, I'm open to many different opportunities and really excited about what's happening in the world, not just in my own little architecture, engineering, and construction industry. And I really can't wait to get out there and start doing this stuff. But I am taking mids slower than most. I'm just taking one class a semester. I'm continuing to work full time. As I mentioned, I have a 4-year-old son who takes up a lot of time too. And I wanted to make sure that I really had time to enjoy being in school. And I am. So it's going great.